Everyone, how you doing? Sorry, I'm just untangling myself from my cables. Anybody else have that problem? They have so many cables sometimes on their desk that it's just like one big tangled mess, like unraveling the history of the universe made of electrical cables. Anyway, welcome back to another video. This one is going to be all about what I did the last month. Now, there's some scope for these videos to go down quite well because I can do one every month where I talk about what I did to some degree in some kind of depth over the last month, and I can do one for the kind of calendar month coming and what training I'll be doing in that month as well. But I won't know if they're going to go down well or not unless you let me know how this one goes by giving it a thumbs up or commenting anything you found interesting or anything you'd want to know more about down below. So I'm going to talk about some of the graphs that I'm going to use to draw comparisons, but we're mainly going to be focusing on the month gone, which is December 2019. So December was like my first month back training. November I generally just do fun rides, ride with people I don't ride with a lot, do more activities with my local cycling club, that's Bynea, and just generally like have fun, because that kind of gets lost when you're just getting rides done in the cold and the wet and the rain in the UK winter. Now in December, when I say it was my first kind of structured month back training, there wasn't actually a lot of structure involved. It was more about, because if you look at what I do, like I race most of the season, so from like March till September. In 2019 I raced much of that period. That bit is fine, but then there's a period between kind of the end of September, all of October, all of November, where my training basically just takes a back seat. Well, when I say training, I mean volume takes a back seat. So I end up doing kind of like something like on average around 11 hours, 10 hours of training a week. And then from there, the intensity increases, and that's mainly because I'm training for hill climbs. I mean, you can kind of see it from this graph right here. This is where I'm generally sat in the build up to September. This was September, the Tour of Britain. And then we drop back down. This is the National Hill Climb Championships right there. And then this is kind of like my off season, I guess, which is a controlled off season. But all a bit of fun before we start building up again. Now, so December turned into a month of just riding my bike, and I'm a little bit like, well, I scratch my head when I'm saying this, but years ago, so maybe 5-6 years ago, we used to do training camps with JLT Condo, and we went to Australia for 2 months out of the year. We used to do like a big block of hours. Like I think we did in January, we were doing like 95 hours that month, which I think, I don't know, averages out to like, well, quick maths, like over 20 hours a week, obviously, on average. So, I mean, obviously the weather makes it a lot easier to do and your motivation's there and everything, but it's whether or not you find doing that actually makes you better. And I don't want to jump down the rabbit hole too much unless you want me to, about like training methods and periodization. I was listening to a really good podcast recently with Stephen Seiler. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. But he basically talks about like how elite athletes generally spend like 80 to 90% of their training time in zone 1 or lower zone 2, and then the rest of the time they spend in their high end zones. So the way they train is they work in the two opposite ends of the spectrum and the two fringes of fitness, shall we say. So they never really work in the sweet spot or the tempo or the threshold training zones, avoiding all the T's there. But I mean, it's interesting actually, because if you look at this, which is my power zone distribution for the last month, I've obviously spent a lot of time in zone 1 and zone 2, spent a little time in zone 3, hardly anything in zones 5 and 6, or even zones 4, but that's because I haven't really been doing anything intense. But it's interesting that my FTP is still fairly high, considering I'm not doing any real specific intensity. It's just my kind of muscle memory and my baseline fitness that's keeping me at an FTP of like 340, 350. Very grateful. But I think the idea that training at these two zones, like if I show you just really quickly, because obviously I don't want to jump down this rabbit hole too much, the last 730 days of my training, the distribution, I mean, it's pretty like, the curve is pretty much there, but if you look at this, like so much time is spent in these zones, and then I actually spend like 5% of my time, so it's 95.5 in effect, if I did it properly. But there is some time spent in those zones there. But we're looking at the 28 days, because we're not going to get sidetracked in this video. So that's my distribution, and I've been doing, we'll go down to the hours and everything. So this is what I've been producing. Now, I'm not sure that's quite right, because I know the last, maybe it is right, but I know if we take out this week here, and we look at, or rather if we take out this week, this here is like an average of like 18 hours. I know Strava's saying one thing, and then Training Peaks is saying something else. So take with it what you want, but this is basically what we've worked with. So we've worked with a step of 13, a step of 16, and a step of 24, and then back down to 13, and we're working on it says 21, but we're going to see where this week takes us, really. My power curve shows you that I've done a couple of sprints, or at least one sprint to bring it up on this peak power chart, but I've done a few sprints. I've done a couple of efforts that are less than kind of 10 minutes, and then anything kind of in this is where the curve starts to drop away quickly, which means I haven't spent a lot of time there, and that's the 30 minutes. So anything around a threshold training session I haven't done. And then I've done plenty of kind of 3 hours rides, 90-minute rides, any kind of endurance ride I've done plenty of. And you can see here, so these translate exactly to this if you want to compare it exactly. The intensity factors are all roughly the same, apart from this week, but I've yet to introduce my harder sessions this week yet, as we speak. So yeah, they're pretty much the same. It's just the TSS that gradually increases. Now, the TSS, that's obviously like the accumulated number. So when you're riding long, say if I was doing, keep it simple, if I was doing a steady endurance ride, I would probably rack up around about 40 TSS an hour, if I was just on a steady endurance ride. Zone 1, Zone 2, for example. So that puts into perspective how much riding I have to do, i.e. 24 hours, to get over 1,000 TSS for that week. So, for the next block, I'm looking at trying to do basically the same that I've done, if not maybe a little bit more. So that's why I've aimed for a little bit more this week. I've got some travel plans. I've got to work that around my training as well. So making sure that everything fits in properly. What I'm aiming to do is another build to push my fitness up even more here. And I'll get into more depth or more detail in another video. I'll just drop it into another video. But I'm basically going to start to, instead of just doing what I did here where I just rode and rode and rode, I'm now going to start doing, one interval session a week, 2 interval sessions a week, 3 interval, that kind of thing. I'm probably not going to shoot for any more than 3 high intensity interval sessions in any given week this month in January. I mean, I can't see, with all the other extra riding I'm doing, so say if I was doing a 24-hour week, I can't see me getting any more benefit in January from doing more than 3, and I have to kind of play it by ear. That's the other thing. Like, I've got to listen to myself in January and February, because a lot of stuff is going around. There's norovirus and other flus and everything going around this part of the world, so I've got to be careful. Illness prevention. So it's all subject to change, but basically I'm kind of looking at replicating the hours but increasing the number of interval sessions that I do, and I'm probably going to be focusing more on anything less than my target is Sacalobra, so a 25-minute-ish a 25-minute-ish climb would require something like some VO2 max sessions, some, probably not any, maybe 1 or 2 threshold sessions, but probably not. Maybe sessions where I'm working 105% of FTP rather than 100%. I rarely ride at sessions where I do threshold sessions bang on. I rarely ever do that. It's either above or below. And I'm probably going to space them out quite a bit. But once I get that figured out and planned out, then I can start to focus on where I need to be by the end of January.